today. Thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome. I am Tanya Eastman. I'm the Director of Education and Training here at United Way's North Star Center for Professional Development, our education and training group that was started really in 2020 and has grown from there. We put on the virtual training series, which this is a part of, and then our leadership learning circles, which our next spring cohort kicks off soon. We're excited to bring you our spring 2022 town hall, the trifecta of our times: connectivity, retention, and balance. Organizations are faced with really how to successfully support distributed work, as many of us continue to work hybrid or from home. Really dealing with the challenges of retaining engaging team members, if that had been not something that organizations had focused or had the capacity to focus on in the past, and then really countering burnout that I think many of us are experiencing. Our goal today is really twofold. One is to contribute to the conversation around these topics and further that conversation and share really actionable tactics or tips that you can take away today and put into practice or to discuss with your teams internally, so that you can put in place in your organizations going forward. I'd now like to turn it over to Dr. Corey Campbell, who is the Vice President for Student Affairs at Jefferson Community College, who will lead our program today. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Eastman. Good morning, everyone. As Dr. Eastman mentioned, I'm Corey Campbell, Vice President of Student Affairs at Jefferson Community College, and I will be today's town hall moderator. Excited about today's session as we have three professionals with vast experience sharing their expertise in areas of connectivity, retention, and engagement, and balance. If you have questions, we ask that you put them in the chat. We will address all questions at the end of the session, just so we can kind of go with the flow. And without further ado, we will jump right into it. And so our first speaker is Mark Britz, owner of Social by Design Solutions. So Mark, you'll be speaking about connectivity. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Corey. It's great to be here, everybody. Glad to be a part of this. I think this is a fantastic format. I also know I have 15 minutes, so I have to move fast, right? I got to get this across to everybody as quickly as I possibly can. We're going to use the chat, so I have some things I'm going to ask of you during my small session, and I hope you'll engage with me because I think the insights come through the crowd sometimes. So a few things I want to share on my screen so we can get this going. There we go. I think you're just seeing my main slide, yes? Perfect, thank you. Hey, so the first thing I have up here is connection. When I was asked to be here, and that's my background, how I help organizations build better connection inside the organizations for continuous learning, for engagement and improvement. The question I initially had was why? Why is connection something? I mean, we feel it in our gut in our organizations. We just went through and are still going through a pandemic, but we have to ask this honest kind of soul-searching question. Of these that I laid out, is the connection you're concerned about leadership and management connection to employees? Is it the connection of employees to each other that you're concerned about? Or is it a connection to the organization, its values, its mission? So I'd be really curious, and I got to open this up so I can see the chat. Actually, I'm not seeing the chat. But if you could, just use the chat and I'll bounce off either Corey or Tanya to tell me what they're seeing. Which of these resonates with you most in terms of what your purpose is around connection for the organization? And you can't cop out on this one. You gotta pick one. Don't say all three, Mark. It's gotta be which of these stand out.
I don't know if you can see the chat. It says each other, team connection for my department members, connecting my associates to our organization.
Good, right. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of the internal piece to each other, and we might have purpose to this. They're always behind any type of connection is what's the why? Why do we want connection? So I'm going to ask that next. What is it that you hope to gain from connection or not lose because of connection? Anybody want to chime in with a word or two about backing up what they said, that they want this? What's the purpose? What's your mission? What's the goal of connection for you? Everything has an outcome, alignment. Collaboration. We'll get to that word in a few minutes. And yes, Tanya, I'm seeing it now. Thank you. Personal interaction, right? Is that a goal or does that lead to a goal? If we have personal interaction, if we have collaboration, right? Retention, right? People are connected. There's retention. I 100% agree. Pride in work, strong communication, excellent. These are great responses. And they're varied responses, and that's perfectly fine. But we have to ask ourselves, anything we're pushing or putting pressure against, anything we're putting energy against, we have to ask, hey, you know, what is the end result we want from this? So what is the end result we want from greater connection? You have to think with the end in mind. Otherwise, we're just sitting around a buzzword. Let's just kind of advance real quick with this. So I have two pyramids that are up here. And obviously with a pyramid, we talk about it in terms of, you know, the bigger block at the bottom, the smaller at the top. And my argument here in this imagery is that pre-COVID, right, before all this diaspora of the workforce moving out, we saw that what was on the left was pretty common. We wanted collaboration to be the big chunk of what we did. And what I mean by that is collaboration is about solving problems, working together, right? Figuring things out. And that is definitely the golden calf of every organization. So we put energy against that, right? We build structures around collaboration. We bought tools for collaboration. We had systems in place for collaboration. And really what we were saying too at that time was most organizations, I'd argue, were saying, yeah, that communal stuff, that's nice. You know, the water cooler, oh, that's nice to have. It's not a necessity that people are connecting and sharing, you know, vacation pictures or videos of cats on Roombas or whatever it might be in your world. But in the middle was this cooperative piece, which is more about sharing information, right? And I say that's still a central point we want to get to. But before COVID, communal behaviors were really small to us. It wasn't the big focus, but it was during the pandemic that we started to see, wow, this is it. We need people to feel good and feel good about each other and feel good about the organization. We started caring about things like psychological safety more. We started to care a little bit about balance, okay, of work and life. We started to care about, you know, what our people cared about. We started bringing more attention to that. So the question that always comes is, we can't stop now. This is what matters. And when my argument is to be made is, if you want healthy collaboration, it tends to come from the fact that you have healthy communal relationships. So we can't go back to a time where we don't want people having chit chat. We don't want people having small talk. We don't want people, you know, sharing these types of friendships in our organization. That should be primary, because generally speaking, the science will show you that people who like each other work well together. So knowing each other at a personal level is paramount. And it's been tricky, right? We've moved into virtual spaces, work from home, work remote, which makes it harder for us to connect. So I think the water cooler has become a critical piece in our organizations, not just something as a nice to have. And to prove my point about this, there's research out there on the Academy of Management. It's from, you can see here on the corner of the slide, Nina Sorolla did this in 2016. This is really, really interesting. What they found is, in an economic downturn, when things are really challenging for an organization, we're heading into a recession, there's pressure in a company, that we find that people collaborate less, not more, right? This is basic, ancient, I would say evolutionary thinking, where people either fight or flight. We've heard this before. And so what happens is they're either going to fight for their organization or they're going to run from their organization. And we find that, unfortunately, the research says when times get tough, people become more insular. They're less likely to share their knowledge with each other because they're thinking about self-preservation. And you could probably look back in your own career and see examples of when that happened, that you didn't want to give what you knew in the organization in a tough time because that made you a little bit less valuable if everybody could do what you can do. So this deeper psychology exists in our organizations, but I say it's unacceptable. You know, we need to be connecting when times are good. We need to be constantly emphasizing a greater connection between people now, right? And so we're trying to do that, and hopefully it stays and it sticks through the pandemic and beyond, because without this continuous connection in organizations, we can't have a culture of we can, that we look to each other and we support each other and we help each other and we see each other as equals and we all grow together. So this is a justification of a little bit of the science and research that's behind this, that we can't let this go. What I'll argue, though, is there's a big buzzword around the word culture. And everybody thinks that they can look at it and go, well, our culture is this. And they define it in a couple of nice, clean words. And yet I would argue that no, your culture is very dynamic. It changes. It can change because of new systems, new individuals, new leadership, new direction by the organization. And if you have a turnover at any level, layoffs and then rehires, your culture now changes. It's very hard to maintain it. But the best way to look at culture is to say culture is the daily behaviors that people enact in the organization, the daily things we go through, the status quo, if you will, and how they respond in situations. What most people try to do in an organization to change the culture, though, is either they focus on beliefs and say, we are this, and they hang placards, and there's leadership mantras that trickle down. Or else they try to focus on behavior change, which comes to a form of like training and, obviously trying to move people in a different direction. But what we're missing, and what I argue is, you need to go even a level up, and we need to look closer at our systems that guide us unconsciously in the organization. Systems is a big, big word, not for computer systems, but we're talking about human systems. I'm really talking about organizational design. And organizational design, when I typically say that, people's eyes start to kind of glaze over a little bit. It's not as challenging or as complex as you might think, because we often inherit organizational design and we don't necessarily think about those rules, those protocols that influence our daily behaviors. Yes, we look to our leaders in our organization, but often our leaders are also guided by organizational design, these rules. So I want to talk a little bit about what those are, because I think this is the call to action in your organization. It's not just about leadership, trying to drive connection. It's not about training and technology. It's about these protocols and rules of the road that people engage in every single day that either connects them to each other, connects them to the organization, or creates separation between them. So here you have them. So on the very outside of what I've laid out here is what I would call some of the most fundamental organizational design elements, from rules and processes and protocols that people are required to follow in an organization, how you approach talent development. Are you focused exclusively on a training mindset? How about technology? What technologies are we employing in the organization? And is it bringing people together? Is it pushing them apart? Your management philosophy or your management approaches, that is critical too. Are they measuring by objective? Are we have a growth mindset around management where manager's job is primarily to bring people up? How about recognition and rewards? I think that's a really big one. Most companies and organizations recognize and reward individual behavior instead of recognizing and rewarding collaborative behaviors, which show a we mentality in the organization. Knowledge management is another one, because knowledge management is how information flows. Who produces information? Who can get the information? How quickly can we access it? And finally, decision making. What decisions can you grant other people in the organization at varying levels to make in the organization? So what my case to be made is that if you want to increase connection and collaboration, you need to look at these elements carefully and ask yourself, are we creating transparency and openness? And by those two words, what I really mean is, transparency is the opportunity to look into something. It's the old saying of like, we can see how the sausage is made. It's important for leadership at all levels to be able to give people the why we're doing something. What is the rationale behind why we manage the way we do, why we make decisions and who gets to make decisions, why we recognize and reward people the way we do, and make that completely open as the next step, because openness is an invitation. You want to co-create. You want to let people have a say. You want to bring people's thinking into these processes to improve them, not just be something they have to accept readily. Obviously, there's opportunities for certain levels of democracy in an organization, but if you really want to create that connection and collaboration, we need to be able to open things up and create transparency so people can contribute at all levels and where they are in the organization. So I want to kind of wrap up what I'm talking about with you in this time I've had, because I haven't been watching very carefully yet how much time I have remaining. So I want to move pretty quickly. The first thing I want to leave you with as you think about connection in your organization is something known as IKEA effect. Is anybody out there familiar with the IKEA effect? I'm just curious if you want to put that in the chat for me. No. All right. I'm glad to hear that. So it's actually it's a consumer psychology study that people have much more affinity or feel closer to the things they build themselves. So if you've ever been to IKEA, you know you get these kind of visual instructions. You get your table or your chair or whatever it is in a box, and then you build it yourself. And so there's been studies done that people who build things themselves look at what they built with a great sense of pride. They look at what they've created and place much more value on it than it actually has. Because we know IKEA furniture isn't like the top end furniture, right? But we built it, so we have pride in it. So what I want you to do is I want you to be thinking about how we can create an environment in our organizations that allows people to build it with you, right? To allow people to have inputs and ideas, because when we put our hands on things, we believe in them more, we take ownership of them. It's critical for employees to build a connection. The next thing I want to bring up for you as a takeaway is there are big conversations and there are small conversations in our organizations. Many of you probably engage in, and this is where I help a lot of companies with, is their social technologies. Maybe you're using Microsoft Teams, or you have Yammer, or you have Slack in your organization. These tools are becoming much more commonplace and they grow kind of grassroots. What we find is there's a lot of small conversations, and those small conversations in organizations are simply questions and answers, like, how do I get this done, right? Who do I talk to about this? Where is that file? And these are small work-related conversations. These are the conversations that get work done. But you need to invite your employees into the bigger conversations, the conversations that can change how work is done. You want to invite people in to answer the big questions the organization as a whole is challenged with. So don't rest slowly on getting work done. Look at ways that people can contribute in the conversations about changes in the direction of the company, the processes of the company, the rules of the company that will endear them to the organization. My last point, it looks like I have 1 minute, my timing's pretty good. When the pandemic hit, we put a lot of emphasis right on Zoom. We need to see people, we felt. We wanted people to see each other. And so Zoom, because it was so darn easy, you pressed a button and boom, you had yourself a one-on-one conference call with your employees or multiple employees at a time. And over time, in 2 years, we've seen something called Zoom fatigue start to happen, where people are spending way too much with their body language and being in these environments. They have their place. And I can't say that everybody suffers from Zoom fatigue. There's obviously a lot of people have learned a great deal about what to do and not to do. But I would say the movement now for you is to look at asynchronous communication. So if Zoom is synchronous, live in a video, in a conversation, the asynchronous tools I mentioned earlier are going to become paramount. And the governance behind them of how we use these tools like Yammer, like Slack, like Teams is going to be critical, because that's going to move information a lot faster and connect people within the flow of work, not outside of it. So those 3 points, from the IKEA effect of building things together, having big conversations, having small conversations, and how you use technology is going to be really critical, and moving away from those moments of, I got to see you, to we're working, we can work in the flow of work. That's my final point. I look forward to your questions afterwards. So Corey, back to you.
All right, thank you, Mark. Thank you. Great summary, and talking about connection to each other and with the organization, as well as working with people that you like, and how that helps with productivity, transparency, and openness. So having that rationale, kind of that understanding of why we're doing what we're doing, how we're going about doing what we're doing. That ownership, the IKEA effect. I was not familiar with that, but I'm gonna add that to my toolbox as well. So I appreciate that. Having that ownership, right? When we have ownership of something, we're more invested in it. Having the big conversations versus the small conversations, and then again looking at how we're doing things, right? So how we are communicating and how we're going about doing the daily business to stay connected to each other and within the organization. So excellent. Thank you, Mark.
Pleasure.
So that's going to take us into our segment with retention and engagement. And we have Joy Marie Horton, who is the CEO of North Country Family Health. And Joey, you have the mic.
Great, thanks everyone. Can you see my screen yet?
We can see it, but it looks like your screensaver is on.
Oh, you're on the wrong slide. Okay, can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So happy to be with everybody today. I have two screens here, so I'll be looking a little bit to my right here, so I apologize for that. I'm very happy to be included today. I just wanted to start out by giving a quick little overview of agenda. I again have 15 minutes, so we'll get through this really quickly. Want to tell you a little bit about North Country Family Health Center, where I work as the CEO, kind of the challenges that we're facing and many of you are currently facing, what opportunities therefore present itself as it relates to engagement and empowerment, and 3 things that you can take away. So really hoping that you leave today and can say, next week I have some really great ideas. Mark gave 3 great examples, and now you'll get to leave with 3 additional ones. So a little bit about North Country Family Health Center. Our organization was founded over 50 years ago to meet the unmet needs of a pediatric population to ensure that they had well child care. We've grown over those 50 years and are now serving all ages of patients, everybody in the community, regardless of ability to pay. Our model is unique because we focus on integration. We want to treat the whole individual in the context of their lives by providing medical, behavioral health, dental, WIC services, insurance enrollment, and those enabling services, which are those non-traditional healthcare billable services, but really help people get access to care. So that is our transportation services, providing care coordination, supporting those who have housing insecurities or those who are homeless. Our organization has about 150 employees. We serve over 12,000 unique individuals a year, another about 4,000 individuals in our WIC program, about 40,000 visits to our health center a year. And on top of that, we changed our services significantly during the pandemic and rolled out COVID-19 testing as well as vaccinations. And last year did 11,500 unique tests and vaccinations. So the challenge today, we are all struggling with how we engage and retain employees. And we know that turnover has become such a huge buzzword. And this idea of the great resignation across the country has become something that we hear about in the news all the time. In fact, one study showed that about 70% of employers are dealing with higher levels of turnover than they ever have in the past. So this has really been a prominent issue in healthcare, especially given safety concerns for healthcare workers, given the constant regulation changes, as well as some of, unfortunately, the COVID-19 related mandates. So we're seeing that we have this huge exodus of people from the workforce. I know Chrissy's going to talk more about burnout later, but when people leave, what does that do? It increases the stress for not only yourself as a supervisor, it increases the stress of your colleagues when no one's there to help you out as a team member. And then when you get stressed out, you get burnt out, and then you're more likely to leave, and this creates quite a cycle. On top of that, the American Psychological Association just published their 2022 survey of American stress levels, and they're higher than they've ever been, focused on the economy, gas prices, the global uncertainty, even the Russian invasion of Ukraine, kind of where are we in the world is very stressful for employees. So at the same time, people are leaving and they're stressed out and they're burnout. We also have employees say, wow, I really like the flexibility I got during the pandemic and I want to maintain that. And now I focus more on overall work-life balance and wellness. And I feel that my employer really should take ownership of my mental health and my wellness, which is a new state for us as employers to be in. So as an employer, and you all working for not-for-profit or even some for-profit organizations, what can we do? So I think the first thing is to remember that this great resignation, as the new term is calling it, is not a recruitment issue. It's really an issue of retention. So how do we retain those great employees that we do have? So love this quote here. This really focuses on the idea that as an organization, we need to see our employees as our most valuable strategic asset from a board and leadership perspective down, not seeing our service that we provide to customers as our most important strategic asset, but really our employees. And have you thought with your board of directors, have you thought with your leadership teams about putting employees first and at that top of your strategic goals? So we've focused at the Health Center on employee engagement and employee empowerment. And a lot of this goes along with what Mark was talking about as well. There has been tons of academic research over the last 50 years on employee engagement within the workforce. In 2020 alone, there was more than 1,500 academic scientific studies or journals written on the topic. So really, what does this mean for us? So we're looking at this as, is an employee committed to the organization? And unfortunately, national Gallup polls show that less than a third of individuals are stating that they're highly committed to their organization. So there's a concern of, are our goals within the organization matching our employees' goals? Secondly, what is the employee's job satisfaction? Do employees enjoy coming to work? And do you look at that to say, what do you like about your job? What do you not like about your job? And how can we design your job a little bit differently? And then lastly, are we energized at work? Again, that same Gallup poll actually asked employees if they were to leave for a new employer, what would make them leave? And 58% said if they could find a new job that matched their abilities better, because they wanted to do the work that they feel that they're intrinsically good at, the work that excites them and empowers them. So have we as employers taken the time to meet with our individual employees on an individual basis to say, what do you feel your strengths are? What are your weaknesses? Can we do some of that job redesign? And then the second part is empowerment. So this is, these three items are from a 2019 Forbes article that I think is, even though it's a couple years old, is a really great article that defines that for employees to be empowered to succeed at something within your organization, they really need three things. So first is the alignment between their goals and then the organizational goals. So really going back to that conversation about engagement, they want to do their best work. So are we aligning our goals and the purpose of our organization with them as an employee? The second is employee autonomy. We have to set our employees free and give them the freedom to be able to design their job so that they can succeed at their job. And I think the pandemic has really, one of the positive things has, because of people being distant from each other and working remotely, it does seem like we have given more employees freedom than we had in the past, especially in our organization. And I think that talks about Mark's IKEA effect as well. They want ownership of it. They want autonomy of it. They want to build it themselves. And then the third thing here is employer accountability. So if you let people free, they also want to know you're still there for them. You're still going to help guide them if they need to. And if there is a mistake, you're there to help them deal with that mistake. This is really where we focus with supervisors on a more supervisory level of how do we build trust within our employees? How do we ensure that employees trust their supervisor and that supervisors are trusting their staff enough to let them go free and empower them? So what can we do about it? So we think that there's tons of opportunities to focus more on employee engagement and employee empowerment within the organization and really focusing on how we make positive change. But I think, as Mark had said, this really does focus on systems level. It's not just one or two little behaviors, it's more of that big purpose. So for us, I wanted to leave with you three main things you could take away today. I did include recommended readings as well. These have been great books for our organization, for me personally as a leader, and these really kind of focus on my three main areas. So the first, and Mark had talked about this as well, is ensuring your employees understand the true purpose of their work and the true mission of your organization. I think we say that our employees know our mission a lot, especially in not-for-profits, but do you ever ask your employees, can you restate the mission? And do they, most importantly, feel that what they do every day, their job duties and their specific job duties can correlate to the overall big purpose of the organization? So we suggest really communicating this often and as much as possible of what is the mission, what are our strategic goals of the organization, and highlighting those great patient stories, those patient care examples. For the for-profit, the customer care, where we had great customer care, can be shown, and really focusing on making sure that on a routine basis, we're showing people that they are doing work that relates to our mission and asking those questions. And if people don't understand what the goal and the purpose of the organization is, really focusing on that. So we do a good things email every week. I send good things, at least 3 good items of patient stories, how we show integration, teamwork within the organization. In addition, we also do, and we have all of our employees align their personal goals for their end of the year performance evaluation to our agency's strategic goals, which is really important for us as well. The second focus here is on culture. So this is probably my most favorite topic. Mark, you kind of set the stage there and introduced that one. And really, this is that idea about how do we ensure that the values within the organization match the behaviors within the organization? And I would agree that this is quite dynamic and isn't just a couple individual behaviors. And we do have to set the system within our organization to focus on culture on a routine basis. So what do people do at work? What is acceptable? What behaviors are acceptable? What is the social norm at work? When someone new comes in, they're going to see what that social norm is, and does it match what your organizational culture is that you define as a leader? So we've focused heavily on this. Since 2017, we created a culture called Be Brilliant. That culture for us focused on the word respect, recognizing the good in the day, enjoying our work environment, being steadfast in our mission, focusing on passion with what we do, empowering our staff, and then working as a team. And then that culture, Be Brilliant, in 2021, we augmented with the training, a full agency training of the Happiness Advantage, which is a book as well as a training design developed by Sean Aker, who is a national positive psychology researcher. And he actually studies the benefits of focusing on happiness and positivity within the work environment, seeing that you can increase levels of productivity and happiness, as well as decrease levels of burnout and engagement of staff by creating a system that focuses on seeing positivity. So for us, we could go on and on, but a couple things you could do to start this out: start staff meetings with focusing on the positive. This allows your staff to start scanning their environment and their world on the positive, put up celebration boards and celebrate positive thing, encourage staff to recognize each other. We do this through our online payroll system. You could also do it via little cards. For us, we have an employee culture committee that focuses on spirit days and spreading joy and recognizing each other. They do happy song music Mondays and wacky Wednesday joke emails, and then really focusing on employee wellness too. We do steps challenges. We encourage people to focus on walking and seeing the benefits of even exercise within the workday as well. And then lastly, really quick, and I'm running out of time, is the focus on learning. We have changed as the workforce, but have our leaders changed, and has our management style changed? So I think that's a really big takeaway for you today, is to say, have I really asked my supervisors, my other leaders that I work with, are you changing your leadership style to meet the needs of my employees today? Highly recommend the Monday Morning Leadership book. In that book, they talk about creating a learning zone within your leadership team so that you can learn from each other. You can read books together, you can share best practices, and you really continue to focus on skill development with your supervisors. So hope those 3 books are helpful for each of you. And then lastly, I left my email up here too, if anybody has any questions or concerns. These are just some pictures of our team focusing on our employee culture. Corey, I'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Joey. Lots of good takeaways. So the Great Resignation, and I'm sure most, if not all of us, have heard about that, and kind of how the pandemic has started, or at least accelerated, the Great Resignation, and what that means to us as a culture and society. Also increased stress. So Joey mentioned increased stress levels, those kind of leading to burnout, which can then lead to that great resignation. The work-life balance. So now we know, even before the pandemic began, but definitely now, we know the importance of work-life balance, and the notion of the importance of mental health, and how, physical health has typically always been physical health has always been focused on, but now, mental health is also right up there with physical health. The engagement and empowerment and the alignment, and that's something that I would ask everyone to think about. What is the work that is being done, and does that align with the mission of the organization? Does that align with the personal passion of the employees within the organization, within the industry? The autonomy. So that's something that, again, working remotely since the pandemic, or even some that worked remotely before the pandemic, again, now having that autonomy, having that sense of ownership and independence to complete the work. And then in general, the organizational culture. So Joey gave some good examples about what they do, like Wacky Wednesdays, good news, things of that sort. So again, trying to have that engagement and retention piece for employees. So thank you, Joey. So that is going to take us to Christy, who is going to speak about balance. So we have Christy Andrus Nakano, and she's a consultant and former professor, and she's going to speak to us about balance. And Christy, the floor is yours.
And I'll look forward to sharing the slides. Joey, would you mind to just close your screen share, please? Thank you, Corey. Everybody, it's a pleasure to meet with you today and to follow two incredibly robust conversations. So I'm hoping you've still got a little bit of room to consider some more pieces. And so, yes, I wanted to wrap things up by talking about burnout with the idea that let's look a little bit about how we can move ourselves into a different way of considering what's going on. So I want to talk a little bit about burnout and about self-care as one of the primary tools, and then moving that in and building on what Joey was just talking about with the whole idea about what the organization in terms of being a we care environment can be. And so that we can get to some of those tips and tricks on this front as well. In the work that I do every day in my company, Human Factor Leadership, I work with leaders to help them create great conditions for people to work really well. So I sing from the song sheet that Joey's just talked about, and talking about those creating the healthy communal relationships that Mark was doing, the co-creation, fully support that. So hopefully these things you'll find that there's great alignment. So let's just look for a minute about what burnout actually looks like. We talk about it a lot, as others have said. And so here are some of the key pieces of it. The physiological ones are the components that are in the exhaustion framework, right? These are the things where we have no energy to get out of bed, where we can't sleep, all of those physiological pieces that say something's not working here, and that those are signs of burnout. And there are other pieces, though, that sometimes can show up for people. So think about yourself or some of the others that you're working with, that the other piece of it can show up is on the emotional framework as well, that cynicism, that's where we used to be excited about what was going on in our workplace, where our clients were our passion centers, and now we find ourselves with very little patience or low tolerance for how things are going with them. That loss of idealism is sometimes a real marker for people who are high performing folks. And then the other piece that tends to happen when people are at that point in stress where coping is no longer working for them is that they just can't get done even what they're really good at in the ways or at all compared to what they used to do. And so there's also this sort of the malaise, the low morale that happens with that in people's reactions to inability to cope. And in my work every day, I'm dealing a lot with leaders who are in this place who've never found themselves there before. And so what we want to look at is a couple of things, because what's been going on is we've put a lot of the pressure on the self-care side of this equation. And as you can see from the title of this information here, there's a whole other piece to this that I think becomes really important, that we really want to look at where we put the emphasis, because what's going on is when we put the emphasis on the individual, it implies that people who are burned out aren't successful, that they're weak, that they have vulnerabilities, that we compare us to them. We've got better coping skills, and that may be true in some cases, but a lot of it, what it says is if everything is on the self-care front, what's going on is we don't put our eye to some of the things that Joey was just talking about, which is what are the organizational considerations. And so, if we look at some of the organizational pieces that might be contributing factors or but either in the development of or in the not helping side of this equation, look at some of the things that are going on in here inside of an organization that are giving people messages that say, you don't matter. We've lost all the people that we were talking about in terms of those who have done this great resignation. And so now I'm doing the job of 2 or 3 people. Or maybe I had a leader before where I could work around them, but right now the way in which they're approaching it, they're stretched too. So we're just not getting at things in the way we're supposed to. And or are those work values, the things that are posted, not lining up with what the culture is really looking at? And so if we look at some things that we could do to kind of work with this, let's talk about it both from the self-care side of things. So what I'd like you to do for a minute is put yourself in the place of how are you doing? How is it going for you? And so one of the important messages, if you're empty, you can't get very far. And so one of the pieces for people, and I work with a lot of really top performing folks, is to believe that instead of pushing forward, where in the past we would say that our strength has always been in, but I can keep going, or other people have got it worse off than me, so I better keep doing what I'm doing. What if you invested in the idea that growth is actually going to come from that place of rest? So looking for and creating conditions for yourself where you can replenish, where taking time for recovery is actually a necessity and not a luxury, something to consider. And so looking at ways to rebuild or regrow yourself is maybe starting to look at some of those physiological symptoms if you're experiencing any, and not using Dr. Google as your way of dealing with them, but actually going to your healthcare practitioner. And I got to tell you, from what Joey was talking about, I'm excited to feel the energy that must be in all of the practices that are part of our organization, to go to people who know this work and to assess how you're really doing. And maybe you are okay physiologically, but maybe you're not. And using the resources around you to be able to get at where it is you're actually sitting and look at what the root of those challenges might be for you. Are they at home? Are they at work? Is it the combination and the slow and steady drip? And getting to that place of acknowledging that you might have a need. Even people who've done great jobs right now may not be coping the ways that they would like. And asking for help is a good thing. That's a sign of strength. And maybe looking for the things. What are the small wins? What are those pebbles in your shoes? Where is it that you're irritated about having to make lunch for everybody at home that maybe you could pass along or delegate differently? Where is it you can use social support? What we know about people who are coping with burnout in better ways is that they actually do reach out and they create a network around them, even if for some of you it has to be on Zoom at this point. If your best supporter is on the other coast, why don't you reach out to them as a consideration? And the other big piece is about practicing patience with yourself, patience with others who are not managing particularly well. Sometimes when people who are used to being great at things decide that they're going to ask for help, their expectations go through the roof about how quickly they're going to recover. Well, the reality is it isn't a quick fix. We need time to sort of get to a place of better healing. And then the other little practical piece around that in terms of the rebuilding on the individual level is to find something that you can do every day, at least for a few minutes, that's something that gives you a space to focus. I'll give you a silly example, but actually it actually works, is adult coloring books. We go, okay, really, Christy? But the reality is that energy focused in on doing that causes your brain and your body to be doing something here so that you're not drifting into a lot of other things that may be contributing to your stress. So thinking about what are some of those opportunities is an opportunity for you. The other piece, and if we look at some of the work of Dr. Suzuki, one of the things that she says is that there's good anxiety and that anxiety actually can be a superpower. So that's kind of a contrast to the way we typically think about anxiety. And what she's saying is that anxiety is our warning system. And in that, what happens is that if we can pay attention when we start to notice those feelings coming up, that it's a message to us that we can say, hey, what's going on here? What is it that I really value? What is it that I'm really looking to do differently so that this is not a problem? And it allows us, when we can, to then turn down that anxiety level so that we can focus in on those pieces that matter most to us. So it's one of the considerations you can look at when those things arise for you that you wish weren't. The other side of this equation is about the whole concept of we care, and in both the work that Mark was talking about, co-creating the communities in the environment that creates health. And Joey, in looking at some of the things and the examples that she gave inside her organization and from what the research says, is that we care is a really important piece of helping people recalibrate. And so if you look at some of these challenges that are happening, do a bit of a check for yourself. Look at how many of them are contributing factors inside of the work that your organization does. If there's one or two, that's lovely. Those are pieces then that you can focus your energy in. And if there are multiples of these that you think are contributing factors, that's a great time for a conversation to start to prioritize what are the challenges that we could start to pick away at, or which are the ones that are most critical for us to work on in the first place. And so as we're going to build, as we're moving forward, let me give you a couple more examples of things that you can look at around creating some resilience in the workplace. So I'm going to go into looking at normalizing well-being and talking about compassion-centered. And I'll pull back to the place that Mark was talking about around the psychological safety. And this is not just about putting pillows around people and not talking about the challenging things. It's about creating a place where people can have the real conversations to really get at what needs to be adjusted. And so in a compassion-centered organization, one of the things that you can consider doing is changing some of the talk that happens. And again, building on what my colleagues have said earlier, is this whole idea of endlessly giving of self is actually not health creating. And that what we really want to do is adjust the way in which we manage the language that we use and what we support, right? Name some of those boundaries that we want to set for work. It's not okay for people to continue to extend themselves beyond something that's sustainable. It's not okay for us to label those who need time as burned out and therefore ineffective or weaker members. It is okay for us to consider some of those cool things that Joey was talking about in terms of looking at healthy workers as actually contributing to a healthy workplace. And so if we look at some of those things, look at what your organization is promoting around this whole concept of successful teams that Mark was talking about too, right? Where is it and what are we doing that underlines and encourages well-being? What are the values that we share? And do we actually even know what people's values are in terms of what they perceive is going to create well-being? And wouldn't that be an interesting conversation to be holding as a leader? And so that's where I want to sort of look at where we're going, because one of the things that we know is what we pay attention to is what we'll see more of. And that's very much a strengths-based positive approach to where we're going. So let me share with you a couple of those pieces in the time that I have remaining. One of the things that we really want to look at is we're not at the points where we were before, where we wanted to do things in ways that were perfect and that's what we always aspire to. What if we change our language at this point to say, what's the next right choice of where we take things as we move forward? So as an example, we've started to tune into asking people how they are. And ideally what happens is that we really listen to the answers that they give us. And if you're noticing that either in the words people are expressing, if it's a safe culture, they may actually be saying some of these kinds of things directly to you. Or if in their behavior something says in your intuition that there's something going on, that you follow up with them privately and that you give them a space to sort of say, tell me more about how you're really doing and what can we do and what can I do to provide you with some good support, is a really important place to sort of open the door for people to know that your care is genuine. It's really important also to not pretend people aren't okay. We are nothing without our people. And so if we remember that, if we go to that place of understanding that the foundation of a great organization is people, that if you're noticing that in a meeting, if they're over the top, if their reactions to things are flat, if what you're seeing says their words and actions are not lining up, call time. Tell people, let's take a break. Let's do a 15-minute, go get your coffee or your tea. Let's do a reset and let's figure out what we can do to make today better as our next right choice. Making space for some of those hard conversations and to acknowledge the grief people are feeling, either because of the actual losses of people that they've experienced during these times, or in the losses that they've experienced in terms of what it's done to their life, their holistic life at work and at home, is the way in which we're going to start to surface some of those struggles that people have. And if we start to surface them, that's where the innovative, real conversations are going to happen, which are going to lead us to the transformations that are going to be required as people demand, expect, and need something different than what we've had before. So there, in a nutshell, is kind of where I'd like to end you. And my information, just like Joey's, if I can help, I'd look forward to it. Dr. Eastman, Tanya has set up for us a follow-up session where I'll give more details on April the 27th. And I'm happy to talk with folks during that as well. So Dr. Campbell, Corey, I'll turn it back to you.
Righty. Well, thank you, Christy. And again, some very good takeaways considering the organization. So again, a trend about where the organization is headed, trends within the organization. And there was a term that I had not heard before, kind of see it in practice, but had not heard it before, good anxiety. And so realizing what that means, the importance of good anxiety and how that kind of relates to the work we have, and knowing the difference between good anxiety and not so good anxiety. Acknowledging challenges. So again, talking about that psychological safety, being able to acknowledge the challenges of the organization. The past 2 years, 2+ years have been challenging for multiple reasons. You know, a lot of it stems around the pandemic, of course. So being able to identify those challenges and having the safety, you know, Christy mentioned having a compassionate organization, compassionate leadership. So having that psychological safety net in order to discuss those challenges. And then resiliency and compassion-centered organization. So again, related to that psychological safety. And another important point, boundaries. So establishing those boundaries and kind of knowing internally when you may need a break, when you may need to just get away, how you're feeling. Because again, as Christy and Joey mentioned, that can potentially lead to that burnout, right? If you're continually giving of yourself, and then not getting anything in return. So again, thank you very much, Christy. So thank you to all of our panelists, Mark, Joey, and Christy. We are now going to enter in our question and answer phase. So I would ask all of our panelists to put their cameras on. And we've gotten some really good questions from the audience. So Christy, we're going to start and put you on the spot, meaning that some of the questions came in when you were speaking, and then we'll rotate it around so that way both Mark and Joey can jump in as well. So one of the first questions that came in is, do you have any suggestions for the volunteer environment as they are unpaid and doing this on their quote extra time? So this is a 3-part question, but that's the first question. So again, and it's in the chat also, but do you have any suggestions for the volunteer environment as they are unpaid doing this on their quote extra close quote time?
I think it's a great question. And I guess the foundation of it is, yes, they're volunteers and they're choosing to be there. So that's your value add strength. That's the opportunity. The second part of it is they're also humans. And so wherever you can have and build on their own contributions, ask them how they're doing, treat them as people. The fact that they're unpaid to me is irrelevant in terms of the value they can add to the conversation. So checking in with them, doing the same kinds of things as if they were a paid member of your staff, and making sure that they're included in information in a timely fashion, answering those questions, why, all of those kinds of things. Treat them in ways that you would want to be treated regardless of whether or not there's a salary associated, is where I'd start.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christy. And Joey, I see that you unmiked. Would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation. I would also add, looking at why are they volunteering? I think some people get involved in volunteer organizations because they know a little bit about you. but maybe what their interests are not really matching what they're doing in their volunteer setting. So I think that's another great time to, just as you would an employee, to sit down and say, what do you like to do? What are your interests? What excites you? What energizes you? And see if there's a match between what you have for opportunities for volunteers and what they like to do. Because I think that often, especially in this, small community, you might get involved because you know somebody or like you're helping out a friend, but what you're doing day to day in the volunteer setting is not really matching, your intrinsic kind of values of what you love to do and feel that you're really good at doing as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joey. Mark?
Yeah, I'm gonna dovetail. Joey, what she mentioned was perfect in the sense that, that's the front end. We want to understand what that motivation is. But I'm also a big data guy. So I like to look at research that says, why do volunteers disengage? The information is out there, maybe not exclusively for your organization, especially if you're new to it. There's plenty of information out there that could set you in the right direction to make sure. One of the things that does come to mind is maybe it's a small thing, is in organizations I've worked with who had larger volunteer bases to them, it was really clear understanding of what the task is, why it's needed, and how it ties to the mission. People who volunteer typically have a passion, and they want to make sure that the energy they're putting to that organization is in fact, contributing to the mission, and being reminded of that is a critical piece.
Absolutely. Thank you all. And the second part of the question, how do we protect the paid staff as they work to make it easier for the volunteers? And so I'm going to kind of interpret that, but essentially like the paid staff have those responsibilities, whereas, the volunteers have them, but not as much, if you will, because they are volunteering. So they still have them, but they kind of have that option to do them, whereas the paid staff would not. So if anyone would like to, so we started with Christy last time. So Mark, we'll go with you, and then Joey, and then Christy, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, if I understand it, I think, the paid staff who has the responsibility over the volunteers, it goes a level up in management to create the structure for that paid staff to make sure they can be successful in that role. Sometimes somebody said, hey, you're the volunteer coordinator, or you're in this role working with these volunteers. How well is that articulated? How well has it been planned out? And how much space is given to that employee to work within a structure? Because how they define that role for themselves as they impart that on volunteers is going to be a critical piece to the success.
Yeah, I think that's great. I would add that it's from the question, it sounds like there might be like an us versus them, which is something we deal with in healthcare, a lot of clinical versus not clinical. And I think that maybe bringing them together so that they see each other as the same team members, really focusing on team building, kind of looking at, is the culture, we say we have one culture, but maybe the behaviors of the volunteers are different than the behaviors of the employees. So how do we align, both of those? Kind of think of them as one group of people instead of two separate groups.
I'm going to leave it at that. That's where I was going too, right? I think we get 4 times the performance from people who feel connected to where we're going and that they matter. And so again, I think if we're creating conditions that cause people to know whatever their job is connected to something bigger than themselves, and where we've pitted people against each other because of the language choices we're using, looking at ways in which we can minimize those pieces. Again, to Mark's point earlier about the small conversations versus the big ones, where is it that we can put those bubbles together to start to feel like people are building a web as opposed to a wall?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, thank you all. And the third part question, how can we get more volunteers when they are pulled in so many different directions? So Joey, we'll put you on the spot first for this one.
We don't have a lot of volunteers at the health center, so I might need to learn from others on this one. But I think that's social connections, right? I think it starts especially, use the advantage of being in rural areas where everyone kind of knows each other. I would say, ask your employees who they think would be a great volunteer for the organization. Ask, networking groups, church groups, anything like that, community organizations. I really think social connection is an important one here. People, if they have that social connection and then you teach them the why of what they're doing, I think that's two of the big pillars. So I'd start there.
Thank you, Joey. Christy, anything to add?
I think these days, I think people are looking for meaning in different ways. And so I think that anywhere where I think there's an openness out there where it's, if my work isn't all giving it, where else can I get it? So really leveraging the social media, making those connections, as Joey was saying, I think recognizing that while people are busy, I think there's a choice in what busy looks like when you're volunteering. So creating those pictures, telling the stories so that people get what it would mean if they went in those directions.
Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of that. The social piece is huge. As an advocate for social connection, I think the story piece of your organization is so critical. Being able to share those stories to the community at large, very openly, and mostly from your own people sharing those stories is really, really powerful and draw people in. The other piece I'll mention too is we sometimes start from a point of being a volunteer and having somebody come in as defined activity. But sometimes there's smaller inroads, into an organization, just being a part of different activities and not necessarily a full-on commitment to being a volunteer is one way to start that process to become a volunteer, to have those smaller touch points in the organization is one way to kind of foster that.
All right, again, good stuff. So thank you all for the responses and thank you, audience, for the questions. So we have another question that came in. How can team members feel empowered to start their own initiatives and get support from their employers? And what tools allow that to happen across any aspect of wellness? So this is in the chat, and I'll ask it again for our panelists. So how can team members feel empowered to start their own initiatives and get support from their employers? And what tools allow that to happen across any aspect of wellness? And so Mark, we'll run it back to you for this one to start us off.
Yeah, I think when any employee shows initiative outside of maybe their call in the organization, that has to be fostered, But I think one of the pieces where things fall off is, as a supervisor, as a leader, overseeing that, you need to help them see the connections to the organization. Sometimes initiatives can be a little bit of an outlier, and then success is kind of doomed because it can't be supported. You won't have the energy, the time, the resources to put against it. So I think it comes down to I go back to that word co-creation and working with those employees to see that their initiative is actually going to benefit the organization. It's going to directly tie to the mission of the organization or the values of the organization. And then once that's determined, it's defining what the success metrics are so that some person who has that initiative can see those milestones being met and that motivation continues. That's where I would start to answer that first part of the question. Now, as far as the tools and the wellness part, I wasn't quite understanding where that was going. So I'm going to leave it to my colleagues here to kind of jump in on that piece.
Christy or Joey, anything to add? And I'll reread the second part of the question. So the first part, how can team members feel empowered to start their own initiatives and get support from their employers? And what tools allow that to happen across any aspect of wellness?
So I would add that as part of our training with Happiness Advantage, we talk about social scripts a lot and how it can take just 3 people to kind of start to change social scripts within an organization. So I would say if you're that employee that's not a supervisor in a supervisory position, get some friends, get some colleagues that also want to change the culture and maybe focus on employee wellness and improvement so that you have kind of a grassroots movement. And then if leadership is not yet involved, as Mark said, that really is core. I think that this is one of those areas when we talk about how we treat employees and culture, where we really need that top approach being involved at the beginning to say, this matters to us, this is important to us. And I think you may need to sell it to your supervisor in some cases, or you'll have supervisors that are more open to it. But I'd say get some buddies to start the process and kind of generate some ideas and then bring it to the supervision or the leadership to go from there. Wellness activities. I mean, you can have a walking club at lunch. You could do a step challenge for your organization. There's research that even taking your hands off your computer for 2 minutes at a time and just meditating can improve levels of accuracy and happiness within your work environment too. So those are small wellness items that can actually make a big impact.
I'm going to leave more space for Mark because there's a piece of it in this question now, I think that's really about some of the things that are in your wheelhouse. So we'll go there. If you want to think strategically about finding support if the senior leadership is not on board yet, I think it's about then looking at where are the potential champions that can support your initiative. And to the point around the Joey's saying about the 3 people, I think that's bang on, right? They say, if you want to change the conversation, change who's in it. So if you can find a couple of allies, if your environment is not in the place of help yet, then looking for where are those potential people that you could work with to try to sort of start to model something and start with some molehills and build the mountain upwards rather than waiting for it to come to you. I'm going to turn it.
I saw that on there. Yeah, Tim followed up a little bit. So I do want to address that because that is in my wheelhouse. As I mentioned in my short presentation about social technologies in organizations, they're becoming much more commonplace. I mean, if you've got Office 365, you've got Teams and you've got Yammer, and how you go about using them is really on the organization and leadership and not leaving those just to be grassroots. I would say and argue that conversation creates movement. So the don't need a lot of finessing. They just need leadership to not be flippant about them. You know, the idea that these tools are just for the employees and let them have their fun with them is a mistake. It's really an opportunity to say, yes, let's use these tools to amplify your initiative idea, to find, as Christy just kind of mentioned, who are those other people who can play a role, because what these social technologies do, especially in larger organizations, is they extend and expand the conversation to many people, and leadership can be a part of that. Because oftentimes in organizations that have a rigid kind of hierarchical structure, a leadership's present in those conversations gives it a whole new meaning to the entire organization. So you don't have to be too complex, about which social tool you're leveraging in this, because I think it just starts with having those conversations. And all the social tools, and I argue this all the time, as much as vendors might tell you differently, they all do 3 things. They just build community, support collaboration, and sharing. And that's it. That's all they really do. So having that opportunity, creating that space for those conversations to happen, and of course being leadership, is embracing those conversations to help people find the other connections to move those initiatives forward.
All right. And as a follow-up, Tim put in the chat, internal. So anything available to hook into external community facing with some of the above needs. So give the panelists a minute or so, and if anybody wants to chime in. So again, and it's in the chat, thinking about internal, and then Tim is asking, is there anything available to hook into external or community with facing some of the above challenges? So Mark, I see you nodding your head, so jump on in.
As I look at that question, and Tim, again, if I misdiagnose what you're asking, I apologize. But I think, obviously some of these technologies like Yammer, you can have external groups within Yammer itself. So you can actually build community-based conversations within Yammer that are external and internal players within that. So you can invite people into those spaces from outside your particular organization. But I also just think firmly that it's always inside out. You want the stories of the work and what's happening in the organization to bubble up and get outside your walls as quickly as possible, and the best light as possible in your organization to kind of draw people in from the outside. And those stories, and I know Christy mentions the word story a lot, and I think it's a powerful term, about the work itself and what people are doing, really kind of draw people in. So again, of these technologies, the internal ones can be leveraged outside of it, but we also have external technologies we know of in social space around Twitter and LinkedIn. These are all very powerful ways to build community.
That works. Thank you, Mark. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Eastman. I know that she wanted to jump in when we were speaking about the volunteers. So Dr. Eastman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Corey. I said I need to know my role. I get so excited. I wanted to participate. So I just wanted to share, we'll put out in the Padlet, which is where we're housing, we'll put the slides in and all of that. I'll share information out on some of the volunteer resources that I have, given that had been my role in my prior organization. And what I would just add to the conversation is, in the recruiting of volunteers and know what your need is, and know if you're looking for someone in person or virtual, because there are so many great resources out there. If you have clarity around what you are looking to have them, how they're supporting you, and then the mode. Catch a Fire is a phenomenal platform to find, really senior professionals around project-based work. I'm located in Central New York. The United Way there has a portal that is phenomenal. There's a couple of regional portals that capture and curate volunteer opportunities. But what's foundational to those is clarity around what you're looking for as an organization, and what you're comfortable with them. Are they in person? Are they virtual? What are you looking for, so that volunteers have an opportunity to really pick based on that stuff. So just wanted to share, I'll share that in the Padlet.
All righty, that works. Thank you, Tanya. And we have a comment. So if any of our panelists would like to comment on the comment, we had a comment from the audience. I am relatively new to a management position and I am burned out. I struggle at times, but I am excited that my new position will allow me to have a more hands-on role in fostering an environment where we can recognize that growth comes with rest. So if Christy, I'll look at you, because I know you had mentioned a little bit about burnout, and Joey, you did as well. With the first, I'm relatively new to a management position and I am burned out. So if there are any coping strategies or anything that you may recommend from your various leadership experiences. So Christy, we will start with you.
Corey. I think so. There's a session that we're doing through this group again on April the 27th over the lunchtime, where we'll get into some more of the details and be able to give some more specifics at that point. So that would be one of the options, is let's carry on this conversation as we're moving forward. I think the other piece of it is to really look at some of the information that is about giving yourself permission to not be perfect. And for women, one of the things that we really want to look at, so from a gender perspective, is about those expectations of all the roles we need to carry, and where it's okay for us not to be at the top of our game every day. And I think sometimes for new leaders, there's an expectation that what we're really doing is we better have the answers. And the wisdom that comes from saying we have to co-create this is a really important component. So I'm going to address some of those things when we get back together at the end of another month as a starting point. Also on the slides that I've provided here, and I know that Caitlin's going to send out afterwards, each of the resources that are listed at the bottom of each of the slides have got really good pieces. So if you just link into any of those ones, it's going to give you some specific tips and tricks as well.
All right, thank you, Christy. Joey, you have anything that you want to add?
So I would add, in our work with the Happiness Advantage, part of that positive psychology research is, focusing obviously on positivity and, internal happiness. But what it did for our organization is actually reduce from pre to post training, reduced our leadership team's level of burnouts by about 25%, which is significant given that we're healthcare providers and we're in the middle of a pandemic. I think the same situation for the individual who commented. So this is an extremely challenging time for those in healthcare. But what we focused on are like simple techniques that do play. Psychology proves that they can play a role in reducing your levels of burnout or improve your internal levels of happiness. Gratitude journaling, but not actually just writing the same 3 things every day. Scanning your environment for what's positive, like what new things today were great at work, what really, was a wonderful new thing, and doing that every day for, set a goal for 21 days, try that. And what happens is you start changing your brain to think of, oh, I'm scanning for positives more throughout the day, as opposed to thinking about, oh, I'm so stressed out, or I got that wrong, or I'm new in this and feeling overwhelmed. The exercise piece, you could do positive journaling of, writing down positive past experiences, as well as kindness for others. So we do thank you cards for our staff on a regular basis. Every leadership team member has a goal to do those. And that gives you that intrinsic, like, oh, that made me feel good. And I really do think that that played a big role in our levels of burnout, saying that we're in this as a team. We're really focusing on how do we change our mindset, and your brain starts to see more of those positive things. You also need to take time for yourself and to, focus on your personal wellness, because if you're not well yourself, you're not going to be able to do that job well either. So take the time, and you might have to set it in your schedule of, I'm, blocking my schedule to go for that 15-minute walk, or I'm leaving at this time so that I have time with friends or family, or time to go to the gym at the end of the day, that kind of thing. But I've learned if you don't block it, it usually doesn't get done. So that would be my advice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I second the gym notion there. So referencing the chat, Christy put in the chat reference to a strength-based appreciative inquiry. So for our participants, there's a link there. So if you copy and paste that in your browser, you have that as a resource. And I see we're making connections as well in the chat. So that's a good thing. So we have time for one more question. Wanted to get the input of each of our panelists. Are there ways to add a focus on connectivity, engagement, and shared responsibility for wellness from the onboarding stage? So from the initial hire stage, I'll read that again. Are there ways to add a focus on connectivity, engagement, and shared responsibility for wellness from the onboarding stage? So we'll go in the order that everyone presented. So we'll start off with you, Mark, then to Joey, and then we will finish off with Christy.
Yeah, so, it's funny because there's two schools of thought. There's orientation and then there's onboarding, right? They're very different vehicles in an organization. Sometimes they get blurred, and I think that's a huge mistake. And so I think what often happens in both of those situations is there's an indoctrination into the organization, and we forget the idea that you're also trying, the goal of onboarding and orientation is helping people see they made the right choice. That they really made the right choice to come aboard as either a volunteer in some cases or as a new employee. And one of the best ways you can do that is, and I go back to the song I always sing, it's like, how quickly can I connect people to the people that they will most engage with in the first 30, 60 days of the job, the people that are going to help them actually in their workflow. Because at the end of the day, and I've said this a couple of times, is people go to work to work. They don't go to work to be entertained, to make friends, or even to learn. Those things happen, but the primary reason people go to work is to work. So building those connections early on with the right people that touch their roles and will impact their success is the critical part to me in terms of the onboarding process.
All right, that works. Thank you, Mark. Joey.
I think that's great. I think that connection and the social piece is so critically important, especially with building new teams. I know anytime, someone new comes on the team, you're kind of learning the new dynamics of the team. How do we work together? And building those social connections is certainly important. We do a lot of team building, get to know each other in a non kind of work setting so that you become comfortable with each other. And I think that we often think, oh, we don't have time for that, but it really is critically important. I think people tend to, once they do those events, they get to know each other better, they trust each other more, which leads to better work outcomes. We do slides for every new employee, a little bit about them, some pictures of their family, share what they're most interested in about working at the health center with, what they're really looking forward to, the foods they love, things like that, that allow you, when you see someone in the hallway, you can say, oh, I, saw that you're a hockey mom too. How neat. And now you have that shared connection to talk to them at work. So I think, and that was an idea from one of our staff as well. So I think that has helped us with new employees that come on, allowing them to feel a part of the team quicker because we're learning about them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joey. And Christy, take us home.
All right. So what you pay attention to is what you're going to see more of is a strengths-based appreciative approach to this. So let me just wrap up with those kinds of things. Taking the time to check in, and if we talk about it at an executive level, we always talk about the first 100 days. Well, what if we talk about onboarding from the same perspective? Think about, and 3.5 months from now, what are the check-in points that you're going to have with somebody, and what are the questions you could ask them that are strengths-based questions to help them to know what's working for them. So one of the questions that you could ask is, what's working so far in the way in which we're approaching your professional and your integration in the relationships here? Where is it that we've done a good job so far in helping you feel like you have a sense of belonging? What are the opportunities or experiences that you've had in the past where it's worked really well for you to feel connected? So really put the new employee in the position of, we value you because we need your ideas. You don't have to come up with everything. It'll be different for every person. But if we can do those intersections 2 or 3 times during that first 100 days, you're walking the talk of you matter too. And the rest of us, so it's from a boss's perspective as well as from the peers' perspective, that you're going to get some of those answers. So maybe those questions are asked by different people. Certainly there needs to be a connection to bosses, because the reason that people often quit organization is they don't quit the organization, they quit the boss. So making sure that that relationship between the two of you is an important one, helping them understand what they need from you as a supervisor. People who are on the more reliant end need a lot of your time in that first 100 days. And sometimes if they're reliant, you might be worried about that. Oh gosh, did I hire the right person? But really what they're doing is they need the checks and balances to make sure what was said up front lines up with when they actually have to put the rubber on the road. You also will have new employees who really feel like if you're micromanaging them in any way, providing them direction, that they're not trusted and respected. So if you can figure out and ask them questions, what's the best approach for you for supervision? What does it look like for you if you feel trusted and respected in our organization? These are strengths-based, forward-focused questions that will allow people in a really very practical way to get a chance to have their voice heard from the get-go.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you, Christy. And that is a great summary. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, Joey. Thank you, Christy, for your words of wisdom and your expertise. And so in speaking about connection and engagement and retention and balance, and now we will turn it back over to Dr. Eastman.
First of all, I just want to say thank you, Corey, Joey, Mark, Christy. Greatly appreciate, phenomenal. The cadence and the flow, you never know when you get folks together how it's going to go. And I am so happy we recorded this, and I wrote down a list of folks I want to share it with. I want to say thank you for everyone that joined us today. We will be sharing out, we use a tool called Padlet, which is just a free landing page. So bios about our presenter, resources, the slides shared, stuff I think Christy shared in the chat, and some other folks. I'm a big for the love of learning, so we'll have some of those books and other resources that have been shared by the presenters. One thing I did here is that there's no overnight solution. So a lot of these are fundamentals. And so if we can make the time and space to focus on the fundamentals, but understand it's not going to happen overnight. And it sounds like there are some really tangible, incremental, human-based solutions and ideas that often can come from our own teams. I think I heard that a couple of times, is it almost, crowdsourcing ideas for what's going to work for us in our organization, what's going to work for you in our organization, and follow that idea that Mark had brought up of the IKEA principle of co-creating. Executive leaders don't need to know the answer. Christy just shared a list of questions that I wrote down, and phenomenal. I'm probably going to go back and take some notes, the transcript from this, and just creating that space to not necessarily respond right away, but to sit with what you're experiencing, what your employees are experiencing, what they're bringing to you, and ask questions that further the conversation. And that was really our goal today. Further the conversation, share some great resources. We have 3 folks on the line that shared their experiences, and Corey sort of added and reinforced those that are doing great things in the organizations they work with. We encourage you to continue to work with us with the North Star Center. Christy mentioned we have a deep dive session with her. We have a deep dive session with Mark in a couple of weeks. We actually have a session next week on ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, which is around social responsibility. That tends to be a bigger thing on the minds of folks in the public sector right now, but can be so relevant. And we're going to talk about different ideas on how do you help engage staff and use those tools. I heard the step counting and the challenges and stuff like that. And so we're going to talk about the environmental, social, and governance piece that is really becoming fundamental to so many organizations, partly from a public governance standpoint, but also from a generational standpoint. Younger generations are asking more of their employers and are asking for more agency and a level of social responsibility, whether they're a nonprofit or a private sector organization. And I'm glad they're calling us to task to some extent. It doesn't feel good all the time, but I think if we crowdsource and ask folks what they need, and then create the space, like Joey said, to let them be successful, we can continue to move forward in these times. Certainly unprecedented, but things will always happen. And if we can focus on the fundamentals and bring ourselves and our teams back to those, I think we will continue to sort of weather the storm. So thank you all again. You'll get an email from Caitlin with all the resources, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.